Uneducated psychologist here for the first time. What are we going to talk about? Well, I'm going to tell you right now what we're going to talk about is some super basic stuff that nobody wants to get into, but I think the time has come to get into it. And that is that the MBTI has become relevant to me, and I'm going to explain why. It's pretty simple. Myers-Briggs type indicator. I'm sure we've all heard of it, taken tests, and said, yeah, it's kind of right. It's almost as accurate as astrology. But if we take a second look, or maybe if you really dive into astrology super deep, you see that it could be much more accurate. I have not dove into astrology to any level, so which I do believe is accurate to some degree, but to verify and validate to what degree it is, I have not done. But when it comes to the MBTI, I have. Anecdotally, for sure, it has become useful. Why? 4 sides of the mind. We have all been in the ego, which is most tests. And then sometimes we deal with the subconscious, which is what the Russians did in the 70s, which is what Freud did as well. But we didn't touch the unconscious and the superego. Freud talked about it, but he didn't really go into depth over it at all. So the name I'm going to toss out is John Beebe. That's the only name I'm going to say, even though there's a lot of people out there that I can reference. But as an academic source, that would be it. The idea is simply that we can address each side on its own, like its own person, which a lot of people say we have different people within us, and that's where you would see it. But what I have recently discovered, which is a nexus, I know it's a cheesy word like synthesis or synergy, but it's relevant, and that's DISC. The worst, absolute garbage personality test you can take, I have found relevance to. Lately for work in my new role, my new job in sales, we kind of went over the DISC test, and I was like, oh, this thing is it's too simple. It's simplistic. But then I found if there were a way to link it to the MBTI with the 4 sides of the mind, which is way too complicated. I will eventually go over how complicated, but to keep it simple, MBTI and DISC can be combined so we can work at different scales. If the DISC is simplistic but still has some relevance at a particular scale, we can use that as a general entry point. And I'll go into those details later. But just as a heads up that's the point. Originally, what struck me as a kind of truth was how using these 4 sides of the mind for one person, and there's 16 types, if you add them all up for every single person, you get the mind of God. Now, I'm going to throw out one more idea when it comes to MBTI, DISC, which is psychology. And this last part has to do with a kind of theory of everything, which of course we're all waiting for. And we may have found it, even though I'm not going to throw out the names that are associated with it, I will say the idea. And it is newish, and it is all-encompassing, and it can be complicated, but it is assembly theory. Assembly theory. And that is kind of like the Matrix idea, except the digital aspect isn't purely virtual in some simulation, but that our biology is the computer. And it must be, that is the way that the universe renders itself, is through biology, not through some other source. And of course, there's a relationship with scale, I believe. But this struck me as very meaningful and consistent. And I'll go over where. So those are the things that, the reason why I'm even presenting these ideas is that there is something there, and I think it's important to record a history of how we can use it and go forward. And with that, I must say, Uneducated psychologist, out.